Hi, I'm Sharaad Kuttan and welcome to Let's Talk, the show that brings you the most important conversation in art, culture and ideas. And today I'm at the Tun Perak Co-op at, or rather on Jalan Tun Perak, and an exhibition called Wawasan 2020 Townhall, Wawasan 2020. I'm going to be speaking to some of the people involved in the exhibition as they look back, not just at the year that passed, but more importantly, the idea of 2020 in terms of the imaginary that the nation has fostered over the last couple of decades. And I'm going to begin with Lim Sheau Yun. She is an independent researcher in art and architectural history. Thank you, Shao, for being with me on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so you wrote the catalog essay for the show, and maybe we could begin, interestingly enough, with what the image, what people will be seeing right behind you, which is a work that sort of brings together both the idea of 2020 and also the man most associated with it, Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. What does Wawasan 2020 mean for you?
Well, I really grew up, in the 90s, 2000s, so like many other school children, I grew up singing the song, right? Every week in assembly, we would be there singing Wawasan 2020, and it was kind of the horizon that we all grew up with. It's an idea of the future in some ways that we're all looking towards, the kind of deadline for quote unquote when we'll achieve the status of a developed nation, right? So I think for me, it was in some ways, the surface upon which you think about the future. And I don't think that's an insignificant sort of horizon at all, right? It maps the way you conceive of yourself in relation to the state, but also in many ways, the ways in which you conceive of yourself in relation to yourself, however X many years from now.
And others, I think one of the things, of course, with Wawasan 2020, it had multiple platforms. One of them was to imagine Malaysia as a society that was cohesive, integrated. The Bangsa Malaysia, I think, is one of those other ideological platforms of the Wawasan 2020 vision. I do want to ask you, though, sort of putting or making a distinction between the year that's actually passed, the real 2020, a year of political crisis and the pandemic, and this much more pristine idea, which I think many kids captured in like pictures of Wawasan 2020, like Jetsons reality, flying cars.
It's always a flying
cars. I think we know the Pakatan Harapan government tried to produce that. Now, so tell us about that. I mean, how do we, as we look at this exhibition, keep those two things separate? The real year 2020 that just passed and the idea of 2020.
Yeah, I think that's always an important distinction, right? I think with Wawasan 2020, it's always easy to think in terms of binaries, right? The year 2020 versus Wawasan 2020. Whether it worked, whether it failed, these easy kind of oppositions, I think really tend to crumble once you look beyond the surface. Obviously, you cannot divorce the idea of Wawasan 2020 from the year 2020. You cannot divorce the idea of failure or success from, how we conceive of it now. But rather, I think it's on us to take a much more expansive view and a much more expansive idea of how we really intertwine the two. I think some of the works here especially really speak to that kind of spirit. We can take the grandness and the grandeur and the utopianness, as well as really looking at those who have been left in the shadows. Right. Those two things are not mutually opposed, but I think have to be read in context.
Right. And before we sort of walk through the gallery space, could you say something about the space itself? Because this is a very old part of Kuala Lumpur, and it must be dripping with significance in terms of our architectural history. What is it about the Tun Perak Co-op's location here?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we are so close to Dataran Merdeka, right? That's already a very easy way to kind of anchor some of the works that we'll see, especially Makte and Five Art Centres. Their whole project was really centered around Dataran Merdeka as an idea. But being in such a historic part of KL, there's a time scale to it, right? There's a sort of long durée of history that we have to consider. And Tun Perak Co-op really, I think, it's a great place to kind of anchor the show.
Right, and so for you, who can't quite see the outside, we're really close to the road. Tun Perak Road is bustling, people passing by, and the gallery kind of works on this inside-outside experience, I think, for those who come here. And I hope everybody takes the time to actually view it. Now, we're going to walk through the gallery a bit and with Shao and to view some of the works. So Shao, so this work by Liu Kung Yu, reminiscent of this large work that he did some years ago, Cadangan Untuk Negaraku, focused on the architectural dimension of the vision, as it were. Could you say something about this work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of idea of the collage, right, really is not new. And especially in the context of Wawasan 2020, there were all these children's books, right, that were produced in order to help people envision the vision rather. So you have the kind of like we said, flying cars, KL Tower, we have Petronas Twin Towers, we have Malaysia Airlines. And this wasn't just a sort of like folk art, quote unquote thing, right? Even if you see Ismail Mbong's murals at PWTC, right? They embody that same kind of spirit. I think what we see here is that same energy, that same, as I mentioned earlier, that sort of same scale, but obviously twisted, right? There's a sort of very obvious there's an obvious fantasy that's involved here. It's a vibrant work, but also speaks to the kind of other side of Wawasan, right? The people pictured all have their backs to us. They're viewing something that we should also be seeing, but at the same time, we're not quite sure what it is they're actually looking at. I think this is sort of strange doubling involved in a work that really is about the kind of infrastructural imagination of the vision.
Okay, we're going to move up, and this is a shop house, as you'll soon feel it, and we're just going to walk upstairs to the other half of the exhibition. So we're upstairs in the gallery now, and behind us the work by Ilan Yi. She's Sabah-based, or Sabahan rather, based in Kuala Lumpur. And this work, which includes in other iterations of the work, the Twin Towers, right, is the major motif for the idea of Malaysian modernity. What does Ilan's work say about this vision, of 2020?
Yeah, I think Ilan is a very interesting case in thinking about 2020, right? A while back, she was commemorating the year, and she really at once came of age in the 90s in KL, right? So if you think of all the punks, you think of all the kind of like grunginess of KL. She came into age at that point in time, but paired with that vision. So I think this in particular speaks to the kind of developmental logic, right, of 2020. Obviously, the Twin Towers are a large motif, but also on the flip side, this other sort of monumental modernity kind of tower, the palm oil tree and the palm oil plantation. In another one of her works, we see the Twin Towers kind of replicated in a fence. Here we see the palm oil plantation similarly replicated to this kind of, endless horizon, right? And obviously the foreground here, there's someone holding up what looks like an identity card. And that really is a very pointed look at what it means to be quote-unquote Malaysian,
right.
What it means to be a part of Europe.
Yeah, and that's very interesting because the work, if you see it, yes, it's both the Twin Towers in these shapes, but it also the bunga manga, maybe, of a kind of a Malay wedding ceremony. There are many things that are evoked, I think, in this image. But okay, we'll take a short break now, and we'll come back with some of the artists involved in the show. Stay tuned to Let's Talk. Hi, and welcome back to Let's Talk. I'm Sharaad Kuttan. I'm at the Tun Perak Co-op Gallery on Jalan Tun Perak, and at the Wawasan 2020 or Wawasan 2020 Townhall exhibition, an exhibition put together by A+ Gallery, works of art along with the co-op, and involves many artists kind of reflecting on the idea of Wawasan 2020, because the year that just passed, 2020. And joining me here today is Lim Sheau Yun. We were just talking to her, and Azizan Paiman, who's an artist who contributed this piece of work along with Hamzah Yazid. It's a title, Selamat Pagi Tuan President, and includes these array of toothbrushes and also these ideas of what constitutes Wawasan 2020. Paiman, could you explain to us why you put this work together? What exactly were you trying to respond to?
Okay, actually, when this gallery invite me to the shows regarding the Wawasan 2022 respond, what I have in my mind is something that I would like to collaborate with the young generation, which I have a friend. He's for me he called as a penyair tidak bertauliah. So,
so he's a poet without permission to be a poet, is it?
Yes, something like that. So I discussed with him about you want to collaborate with me with the new works for the show. Oh, he eager to make it. So the discussion is happened about this is talking about Wawasan 2020. And then the chatting happened, and suddenly he come an idea about I'm not to see it 2020 not as a one words. That chopping will be the 4 units 2020. So that's mean he like to respond about 22 years in power and 22 months as a leader. So anyway, by using a unit narrative with 22 units of narrative in the sajak. Okay, so when he get the thing, and then I responded with what is it is talking about politics, economy, religions, environments, whatever. So anything. So I responded with a toothbrush. Because toothbrush for me is an everyday life that we use, but have a open-ended meaning. So for me, the toothbrush also can be suggested as a leader, can be suggested as a worker, as a person that been used.
Okay, I want to stop you there because, you know, Sheau, it sounds very interesting. Again, we're back to, in some ways, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, right? So the 22 years in power, and then as you know, Prime Minister of the Pakatan Harapan government, 22 months in power. And this thing, we can't extricate this idea of what was modern, what was projected about the future with this man Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. How do you kind of read that? I mean, especially in terms of the way in which the sajaks work, you know, with the refrain, Wawasan 2020.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I always read Wawasan 2020 as this kind of cipher, right? In some ways, it's nothing. In some ways, it's just a mechanical algorithm that contains no real information. It's an operation, and it allows this kind of, you know, it captures everything, right? You know, it allows like, different sorts of readings to be projected upon it. It's almost a vessel and a surface upon which then anything can happen. And I think we see that here, right? With this work in particular, the sort of toothbrush becomes this idea that represents like economic, social, like even religious, like you were saying earlier, Paiman, themes, right? So there's a kind of there's a way in which it suspends different sorts of imagination.
Okay, I want to come back to the idea of why Dr. Mahathir dominates this vision of the future, why he did dominate it so much. Because again, it's Dr. Mahathir, not just this idea of becoming modern, right? Why couldn't we take those two things apart? I mean, why is it that he became so powerful?
For me, he has his own persona. But anyway, like us, okay, for me, an artist is an antenna of society, which we try to observe in a different angle to see his persona. So for me, have yin and yang, a good and bad thing. But as a layman, I would like what I say. We would like to see and observe the thing that he never give the focus in that situations. Right. As an observer, I just respond with what the thing that he never see.
Okay, Dr. Mahathir didn't see. Is that,
Yeah.
Okay, so when we look at some of the work here, Shao, I mean, and you have an overall sense of the work here, is it anchored only in Dr. Mahathir, or how do you see that working out?
Yeah, I mean, definitely it's influenced by Dr. Mahathir. You can't really escape the specter of Mahathirism, right? I think that actually occurs in all kind of domains of our lives. But in some ways, it's also an effort to step outside of just the Mahathir-centric vision. The idea of the show is to kind of present this town hall, right? A democratic space in some ways of bringing together, of, you know, engaging with difference and engaging with disjunctions. So I guess the sort of spirit of the show tries to step outside of it.
Right. Paiman, you know, do you think that we have learned to develop a vocabulary to talk about the future that is not anchored in some charismatic individual, Dr. Mahathir, Anwar Ibrahim, you know, the current Prime Minister, anybody, right? That we as a society are much more autonomous than from the political elites that control us. What's your own thinking? Because I know you work on a lot of political themes in your work. How do you see it?
Okay, I see this as an artist. And then for me, an artist couldn't join a party for me, because when you join with a party, that you will fix with the manifesto of the parties. So as a person, yeah, exactly, an artist is like a reporter. So to report, to investigate back, to define back what happened. So this is not talking about the legacy of Mahathir, Anwar Ibrahim, who after this. It's talking about what should we respond and what should we comment, give an opinion by using an artworks. I'm not stand here as a politician. I'm standing here as the artist who respond with what happened in my societies, in a Malaysian event at this moment.
Right, okay, wonderful. Okay, we're going to take another short break and we'll be back with another artist who's contributed to this show, Wawasan 2020 Town Hall here at the Tun Perak Co-op. Hi and welcome back to Let's Talk. I'm Sharaad Kuttan. We're at the Tun Perak Co-op Gallery off Jalan Tun Perak at the Wawasan 2020 or Wawasan 2020 show. Town Hall, actually, it's Wawasan 2020 Town Hall. And we've been talking to various people involved with it. Lim Sheau Yun is the catalogue essay writer for this particular exhibition. And joining us now is Tan Zihao. He's an artist contributed these two works, one of which consists of this text here, second chapter of Dr. Mahathir's Malay Dilemma, What Went Wrong. Zihao, thank you so much for joining me. I want to ask you about, again, you know, this choice of somehow associating Vision 2020 with Dr. Mahathir and, you know, your choice of using his work here. Why Dr. Mahathir, in your mind, why these things inseparable?
Well, I think for this particular work, it's produced in 2015, and it was a response to Mahathir's criticism against Najib at that time, right? And I think what I'm trying to say from this work is that I'm actually using the second chapter of the Malay Dilemma and kind of censor out the text apart from the title of the second chapter, which is What Went Wrong, and the final line, which is That Was What Went Wrong, right? By censoring out whatever that happened in the middle, right? I'm really questioning the kind of censorship that has been persistent throughout Mahathir's ruling period. And I'm also seeing his criticism against Najib as a form of unjust criticism, because I'm also considering the fact that one can read Najib's idea of doing politics, Najib's economics, as a continuation of Mahathirism. So in that sense, there is an irony there.
Right, and that's very interesting because I think, you know, the country is constantly caught up in it's actually the agreed basis for the national narrative, right? So even when you talk about Malaysia, never mind this idea of the future and what it wants and the diagnosis of what was the past is on which this is based. So Sheau, you know, how do you see this? I mean, again, you know, we have this thing where we have the top and tail. We, as it were, we know there's the problem, and then there's all this blank space in which to assert ourselves. And in Dr. Mahathir's old understanding of Malaysia, he writes himself out of the narrative that led us to a bad kind of politics and kleptocracy and such, right? So how do you see that playing out in some of the works of this exhibition?
Right, yeah, I think, you know, in many ways, Mahathir is trained as a doctor, right? I always see Wawasan in some ways as a kind of prescription for the nation.
You take two of these pills in the morning,
exactly.
And in 40 years we'll
brush
achieve
your teeth
that.
in the morning and your teeth won't get rotten, right? But I think the sort of intentional extraction of the individual, and you know, I think it's hard to ignore that 2015 is the first year he actually showed up to Persay, right? Which caused great rancor among the ranks of politicians at the time. It's impossible to separate, and I think the works here in particular, especially, you know, the one we saw downstairs just now, you know, it directly puts him back into the narrative, yeah. Even though there's a sort of narrative kind of tool, like in some ways a kind of rhetorical tool that he's trying to in some ways avoid the blame. I think it's hard not to separate him from the idea.
Right. See how you contributed these two other pieces that sit on these plinths. Could you tell us what they are? Because they're the new pieces made specifically for this exhibition.
Yeah, the first one is actually an old work. It was produced last year after the Sheraton move. And the second one is a new work produced for this, specifically for this show. Right, so the first one, I'm actually playing with the idea, these two works are like artworks that are intentionally designed to look like a page torn from a book, right? So there are specific references in these pages that points to particular events. And the first work is really about, the discourse in these two works is really about the discovery of a 15th century stone relief that has the carving of Kala, right? And Kala is this god of time that devours everything. So I'm really playing with the idea of Kala. And also I'm thinking about the meaning of political change, because as we know, the Sheraton move, or before the Sheraton move, Mahathir was re-elected as the Prime Minister. And it seems to me that if we talk about Mahathirism as a kind of chronopolitics, as a timescape, what do we mean to have Mahathir coming back to us, right? And what do we mean when we say today the idea of a post-Mahathirist Malaysia? What does that mean when Mahathir has returned once again and then toppled again?
Yeah, I'm not sure we've reached the post yet, actually. But okay, I want to ask you, Sheau, about your essay itself, because it's titled Thinking Time in 2020. What were you trying to argue for in this particular work?
Right, in that one, it's a kind of speculative essay, right? It really takes this tunnel on Jalan Kinabalu, which I had sort of seen for the first time being a newbie to KL, and examines, you know, the picturing of the nation there. And really, you know, in many ways, it's also dealing with the same theme, this recursion, this sort of weird flipping, right? When you're driving through the tunnel, instead of driving through time as you would think of in a kind of linear sense, you start with the past, you end with the future. The direction of traffic is such that you're driving against time. You start with the glitz, the glam, then you have Merdeka in the middle, and then you have the sort of old shop houses of KL, right? So in many ways, it almost feels in some senses also because of the pandemic, you know, we've been stuck at home for most of 2020. It feels like we're kind of perched on an edge, you know, it kind of feels like we're in this loop. And how do you deal with that? How do you contend with that? And I think, you know, it's how you sort of take this very long durée approach, right? The Makarao dates back also to, you know, Javanese and Hindu Buddhist temples in the like 5th, 6th century, right? And I guess for me, what I did then was to try to take a kind of more speculative approach with, you know, a sort of a relic that's around us.
Right, okay, and in the kind of remaining minute that we have, you know, when people come to this exhibition, what would you want them to kind of read or understand about the works? I mean, not just yours, but also those that kind of work off yours.
I think it's interesting that Shao just mentioned her approach of being speculative. I think it's also important to understand that the Vision 2020 itself is a speculative fiction. And I think most of these works really try to question the different aspects of the Vision 2020, and to see that Vision 2020 while it's a political vision, it's also a speculative fiction of an individual that has immense power.
Right. Okay. Thank you both for joining me. I'd like to also thank Azizan Paiman, and who's talked about his work and which he collaborated with Hamza Yazid. This is the Wawasan 2020 Townhall exhibition at the Tun Perak Co-op on Jalan Tun Perak. Hope you all have take the time to come to see this work. Very interesting way to meditate on the year past and also what we aspire to as a nation, and you know, whether we need to find other narratives and other routes to getting to the future. That's all we have for the show today. I'm Sharaad Kuttan. Come back next week for Let's Talk, only on Astro AWANI.